The chamber was vast, shaped from black alloy polished to a mirror sheen, its ceiling lost in shadow. At its center stood a table of obsidian, carved with words in a dozen alien tongues. The weight of history pressed down on everyone present. Even the murmurs of the assembled delegations, scaled, feathered, chitinous, faded to silence when the Phrex emissary placed a tablet upon the surface. "By the book," the emissary said. His voice rasped like stone dragged over metal. "Your species is challenged. Win, and you will be recognized as peers. Lose, and Earth's petition dies here." The human delegation stiffened. Some shifted in their seats. Others stared in disbelief. Elias Reese did not move. He leaned forward, studying the tablet. Ancient lines of law glowed faintly across its surface, shimmering like trapped lightning. He felt its gravity. This was no mere artifact. It was a weapon, sharpened across centuries of precedent. He let silence hang for a moment longer, then rested one hand on the stone. "By the book," he replied evenly. A faint smile touched his lips, not bravado but acceptance. The emissary's black eyes narrowed. Hours earlier, the Alethea had slipped into orbit above Aurum 9, its hull gleaming white against the station's massive ring. Elias had spent that descent in his quarters, rereading old compacts and human maritime treaties. He had a scholar's mind, restless and disciplined. Yet beneath the calm, unease gnawed at him. The Phrex Dominion had maneuvered Earth into this trial, and he knew their reputation. No one left their courts victorious. "Diplomacy dressed as strangulation," he muttered. The door chimed. Commander Vela, head of the Alethea Security Detachment, stepped inside. She was broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, her uniform immaculate. "You've heard the conditions?" They were predictable, Elias said, standing. Phrex never challenge by arms when they can win by precedent. Her jaw tightened. "Precedent you don't have. Earth's only been out here 40 years. That's why they chose a duel." He gathered his data slate, sliding it into his sleeve compartment. "They expect us to collapse under the weight of their history." She studied him. "And do you?" No, his tone was firm, but he didn't elaborate. He couldn't, not yet. The chamber filled quickly that evening. Delegates gathered in concentric tiers, watching as the obsidian table activated, projecting glyphs that shifted between languages. Elias recognized some agreements from the Athari Tribunal, clauses from the Cultic Conventions, all records of alien disputes long settled. They swirled like weapons in the air, ready to be drawn. Then came the Phrex. High Warlord Archivist Karvek Drawl entered with deliberate steps, flanked by his retinue. His armor was ceremonial, each plate etched with the Dominion's victories. His crest of bone ridges caught the chamber light, casting long shadows. Where Elias was calm and unadorned, Karvek was a monument to his people's pride. "Human," Karvek said, his voice carrying through the chamber without effort. "You come untested, wielding a history too short to fill a single ledger. Yet you demand a place among us. Do you believe improvisation will serve where centuries of law are forged?" Elias rose slowly, adjusting the cuffs of his diplomat's coat. His movements were precise, deliberate. "I believe history is not measured in centuries," he replied, "but in meaning." A ripple moved through the assembly. Some aliens tilted their heads. Others hissed softly. Karvek's jaw tightened, though his expression remained controlled. "You will argue by the book," the Phrex declared. He touched the tablet, and glowing symbols surged upward, lines of law cascading like a storm of glass. No invention, no false precedent, only what is written. Elias stepped closer, letting the light play across his features. His heart thudded once hard, then steadied. "Then we will both find," he said, "how much is truly written." The duel began with formality. Karvek cited a Dominion compact dating back 600 years, establishing trade rights over disputed lanes. His voice was strong, each clause spoken with the finality of iron. The holographic text flared above the table, unyielding. Elias did not falter. He countered with precedent of Earth's own, an 18th century maritime principle concerning open waters. The chamber stirred. Some delegates frowned. Others leaned in. "That law is from a single planet," Karvek growled. "It is from a species," Elias corrected. And the principle is universal. No power may claim what cannot be truly possessed. The holographic glyph shivered, adjusting to his interpretation. A few alien delegates tapped their data slates, recording. Karvek's gaze hardened. He launched into another citation, pulling from the Athari tribunal. Elias listened intently, not only to the words but to the structure beneath them. Every Threx clause was a fortress, rigid, strong, yet unmoving. He noted the pattern. Between rounds, Elias returned briefly to his seat. Vela leaned close. You're walking a knife's edge. If they call your arguments irrelevant, they won't. He kept his eyes forward. The rules demand recognition of precedent, regardless of origin. They designed this duel to bury us under history. They didn't consider how quickly we can wield it. Her brow furrowed, but she nodded, retreating into silence. The duel continued. Hours passed. Each time Karvek pressed forward, Elias bent the rules without breaking them, weaving Earth's brief history into universal principles. The murmurs grew. Delegates from distant worlds whispered among themselves, some clearly unsettled. At last, Karvek slammed his clawed hand upon the table. The sound rang like steel on stone. You twist words as if they are clay. That is not the way of law. Elias met his gaze without blinking. Law is clay, high warlord, shaped by hands, fired by conflict, made lasting only when it proves useful. You wield it like a hammer. We wield it like fire. The chamber went still. Karvek's eyes narrowed to slits. His ridges caught the light, throwing his shadow long across the table. Then burn, he said softly. We will see what survives. The duel was suspended for the night, to resume the following day. As the delegations dispersed, Elias remained by the obsidian table, staring at the fading glyphs. His reflection wavered in the stone, tired eyes, steady hands. You play a dangerous game, Vela murmured behind him. All diplomacy is dangerous, Elias said. His smile returned, faint but sharp. But tomorrow, we stop playing by their book. We start writing our own. The second day dawned cold and pale through the observation ports of Aurum 9. Ships glided across the void beyond the station's rings, their running lights flickering like restless stars. Inside the human quarters, the mood was taut, every officer speaking in hushed tones. Elias stood alone at the viewport, his reflection clear against the black expanse. He had not slept much. Instead, he had paced the narrow corridors of his mind, rehearsing possible traps Karvek would lay in the counters he might build. Where the Threx had centuries of precedent, humanity had creativity, dangerous in its unpredictability, fragile in its lack of recognition. The door slid open. Commander Vela entered, helmet tucked beneath one arm. Council expects you in less than an hour. Are you ready? I've been ready since yesterday, Elias said quietly. It's Karvek who should be asking himself that. She studied him for a beat. You enjoy this more than you let on. Enjoy isn't the word. He turned from the viewport. But I understand it. That's enough. The council chamber was more crowded than the night before. Delegates filled the tiers, some leaning forward with anticipation, others murmuring among themselves. News of the first exchanges had spread fast. Humans twisting ancient maritime codes into interstellar law. Some found it clever, others dangerous. All had returned to watch the outcome. Karvek arrived with thunder in his stride, armor plates glinting under the high lights. His retinue moved like shadows behind him, each bearing the Dominion's crest. He wasted no time with greetings. The duel resumes, he declared, voice sharp. By the rules of Aurum 9, I call precedent. The obsidian table pulsed to life, its surface igniting with glyphs. Karvek spoke of the Kalthic conventions, treaties forged after wars long forgotten. His words carried weight, the cadence of someone who had memorized every clause like a liturgy. Thus, Karvek concluded, a species without centuries of compacts cannot claim parity among those who do. Recognition must be earned through proven endurance, not rhetorical illusions. Applause rose from sections of the chamber. The Threx delegation leaned back, confident. Elias stood slowly, resting both hands on the table. His voice did not thunder like Karvek's. It carried steady, deliberate You argue that only age grants validity. Yet the conventions themselves were written after conflict. Conflict resolved not by duration, but by necessity. The glyphs shimmered, adjusting as the system interpreted his argument. A faint ripple of interest moved through the crowd. Necessity, Elias continued, is timeless. Humanity's short record does not strip it of meaning. Our wars ended in agreements. Our seas were charted with rules. Our nations built frameworks of trade. The age of the law does not make it more true. Its usefulness does. A silence stretched. Delegates whispered in different tongues, some nodding, some frowning. Carvek's lip curled. So you claim your species' provincial disputes equal to conventions that ended wars spanning systems? I claim, Elias said, that the principle is the same. The scale changes. The truth does not. The duel pressed on, point for point. Carvek cited the Authority Tribunal, its rulings on territorial claims. Elias countered with Earth's salvage law, drawing parallels between abandoned wrecks and unclaimed asteroids. At first, the chamber reacted with skepticism, but as Elias framed the argument, rights established not by ownership alone, but by responsibility for what is taken, delegates leaned closer. The system processes reasoning, overlaying human law across alien precedent. The holograms wove together, not seamless, but functional. You call this innovation? Carvek snapped. It is mimicry, a child painting crude likenesses of its elders. Perhaps, Elias allowed, but even crude likenesses can reveal truths their originals overlook. A ripple of laughter broke out from a cluster of smaller species. Carvek's jaw tightened. The duel paused briefly for procedural review. Delegates filed opinions, which the system archived. During the recess, Elias sat at the human table, shoulders still, hands folded. He felt Vela's presence beside him, tense as drawn steel. You're making enemies fast, she muttered. I'd be worried if I wasn't, Elias said. You're also making allies. Quiet ones, the ones who resent the threats. His mouth quirked faintly. That was the point. When proceedings resumed, Carvek shifted tactics. He invoked a clause that limited the creation of new compacts without universal recognition, cornering Elias into a paradox. If Earth had no recognition, how could its precedents matter? The chamber stirred. Some delegates murmured agreement. The trap was elegant, simple, sharp, and nearly airtight. Elias breathed once, steady. Then he said, recognition is not given. It is taken. Every clause you cited exists because someone, somewhere, defied another's refusal to recognize them. If recognition were required first, no treaty would exist at all. The holographic glyphs flickered. The system evaluated, hesitated, then merged its reasoning into its lattice of precedent. The chamber buzzed with energy. Carvek slammed a clawed hand against the table. You poison law with sophistry. No, Elias said evenly. I remind law of its origin. The exchanges grew sharper. Carvek pressed with history spanning centuries, each precedent a fortress. Elias responded with agility, weaving Earth's fragmented but flexible legacy into every breach he could find. Sometimes he conceded points, only to pivot into a larger principle. Sometimes he reframed Carvek's own words against him, turning rigid structures into traps. The chamber became a battlefield of logic. Delegates leaned forward as if watching a duel of blades. The Threx delegation hissed in frustration. Human officers clenched their fists, whispering encouragement under their breath. At last, the council presiding judge raised a hand. The glyphs froze. The day's proceedings are adjourned. Tomorrow, the final session will determine validity. A wave of murmurs swept the chamber. The duel had not broken either side, but momentum had shifted, subtly, unmistakably, as delegations dispersed. Elias lingered at the table, eyes fixed on the frozen lattice of law above it. The patterns glowed faintly, weaving alien and human precedent together. It looked fragile, inconsistent, yet undeniably present. Vale approached. You kept us alive another day. Alive isn't enough, Elias murmured. Tomorrow we need more than survival. She studied him. Do you have a plan? He touched the obsidian's edge. feeling its cold surface. His reflection stared back, calm, sharp, and unyielding. "Yes," he said quietly, "but Karvek won't like it." The final session opened beneath the great vault of the chamber. Every delegate had returned, joined by new observers drawn by rumor. Whispers carried through the tiers. The humans were holding their ground. Some found it absurd. Others found it dangerous. All wanted to see how far it would go. Elias Reese felt their eyes on him as he approached the obsidian table. His movement betrayed no hesitation, though his chest carried a heavy thrum of tension. To falter now would not just lose Earth's petition. It would mark his people as pretenders forever. Karvek Draw was already there, waiting. The high warlord archivist stood like a statue of iron, armor gleaming, ridges casting long shadows across his face. His black gaze followed Elias with open contempt. "Today," Karvek announced, "the record will close. Law will be measured against improvisation. And improvisation will be broken." The obsidian table flared with glyphs. The duel began. Karvek struck first. He summoned a precedent from the Caltary Accord, a ruling that bound lesser species into tributary status if they lacked an archive of recognized compacts. His words were precise, delivered with the confidence of a predator. The holographic lattice expanded, weaving alien symbols into a cage around Elias' position. "You cannot escape this," Karvek said. "By the very standards you claim, you are nothing. Without archive, without lineage, you have no ground to stand." The chamber stirred. Delegates leaned closer, recognizing the trap. It was elegant, merciless, closing the circle around humanity. Elias placed both palms on the table. His voice was steady, low. "The Caltary Accord was written after the subjugation of weaker peoples. You claim it as law. I claim it as evidence of injustice." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Accusing precedent of injustice was near heresy. Even Vela, seated with the human delegation, stiffened. Karvek's ridges flared. "Law cannot be unjust. It exists because it is enforced." Elias leaned in. "Then tell me, warlord, when the accord was signed, did every species agree freely, or did some agree with blades at their throats?" The holograms faltered, hesitated. The system parsed the argument, struggling to reconcile. Elias pressed harder. "Consent under duress is no consent at all. By your own words yesterday, recognition must be earned. If recognition is extracted by fear, it is void." The lattice flickered, shifting. Delegates murmured, some nodding slowly, others muttering in disapproval. Karvek slammed his clawed hand on the table. "You twist meaning into treachery." Elias did not blink. "I remind you that law without consent is tyranny dressed as precedent." The duel raged forward. Karvek cited alien compacts, centuries deep, each one delivered like a blade thrust. Elias parried with Earth's history, sharp but brief. The Magna Carta, the Geneva Conventions, the Nuremberg trials. Each time, he shaped them into universal lessons, turning human history into mirrors that reflected the flaws in alien law. Delegates shifted in their seats, whispering in dozens of dialects. Some leaned toward the humans, intrigued by the audacity. Others scowled, disturbed by the disruption of established order. Midway through the session, Karvek unveiled his most brutal assault yet. He conjured a clause from the Dominion's archives. Any species unable to provide continuous documentation of compacts for 5 centuries was unfit to hold equal vote. The hologram expanded like a net, binding Elias' position from every angle. "Your record is fractured," Karvek said, his voice heavy with triumph. "Your history is too brief. The Dominion's law denies you parity. This chamber cannot ignore what is written." The silence was suffocating. Even the human officers exchanged uneasy glances. Vela's jaw was tight, her hand hovering near her sidearm as if instinct alone compelled her to fight when words seemed hopeless. Elias studied the glyphs, heart pounding. The trap was airtight, a snare woven from centuries of documentation humanity did not have. For a long moment, he said nothing. Delegates began to murmur. The Threx delegation hissed in satisfaction. Then Elias spoke, quietly, but every word carried. 5 centuries of continuous documentation. You say this makes one fit. Yet this law was written less than 4 centuries ago. By its own measure, it is unfit to exist. The chamber erupted. Gasps, laughter, shouts in alien tongues. The hologram glitched, struggling to reconcile the contradiction. Elias pressed on. If the law condemns what does not meet its span, then it condemns itself. Unless, of course, you admit that even a short history can carry weight. Delegates leaned forward, some clapping their hands or striking their claws against the rails in approval. Others shouted objections. The chamber was alive with uproar. Carvek's eyes blazed. You dare use our law against itself? Elias straightened. I do more than dare. I do as you commanded, by the book. You asked me to argue within it. I show you the book's contradictions. If that frightens you, perhaps it is not I who disrespects the law. The duel slowed after that exchange, but tension thickened. Every move mattered. Carvek grew more aggressive, hurling precedent after precedent, his tone sharpening with fury. Elias met each strike with calm precision, weaving human principles into arguments that unsettled the chamber. At one point, Carvek accused him directly. You invent connections where none exist. You create laws from imagination. Elias answered simply, all laws were once imagination. The words hung in the air, undeniable. Hours passed. The duel reached a point neither side could easily break. The lattice of glyph above the table had become a tangled web, alien and human clauses interlaced, contradictions exposed, parallels drawn. It was no longer a fortress. It was a battlefield. Elias' voice began to strain, though his composure never cracked. Sweat touched his collar, but his eyes remained locked on Carvek's. Each counter demanded precision. Each defense risked collapse. He knew the High Warlord would not relent until he forced a mistake. Near the session's end, Carvek delivered his final strike. If you claim all laws are subject to reinterpretation, then none can stand. Without permanence, there is only chaos. Humanity brings chaos. Chaos cannot be trusted. The words resonated. Delegates murmured agreement. Some nodded firmly. It was a powerful blow, and Elias felt the weight of it. He answered with no hesitation. You say chaos cannot be trusted. I say permanence without adaptation is death. Rivers shift, stars collapse, empires fall. The law must bend, or it breaks. Humanity does not fear change. We endure it. That is why we stand here, across centuries less than yours, yet unbroken. The chamber stilled. The glyphs shimmered faintly, capturing his words, embedding them into the lattice. The presiding judge rose. The duel concludes for the day. Tomorrow, final deliberation shall decide. As the chamber emptied, Vela walked at Elias' side. Her voice was low. You nearly broke in there. Yes, Elias admitted. His throat was raw, his body exhausted, but a faint spark lit his eyes. And so did he. They stopped at the exit, the glyphs fading behind them. Tomorrow decides everything, Vela said. Elias nodded, voice barely above a whisper. Tomorrow we stop fighting his book. Tomorrow we write ours. The chamber felt colder on the 4th day. The lights burned white, casting hard shadows across the obsidian table. Every delegate was present, their voices hushed, their expressions taut. Rumor had spread that the duel was balanced on a knife's edge. Today would decide which way it fell. Elias Reese walked in with measured steps, his coat hanging neatly, his eyes clear despite the fatigue dragging at his body. He had spent the night reviewing fragments of human law, searching for something sharp enough to cut through the Dominion's net. Yet what he carried now was not certainty, but conviction. Across the chamber, Carvek Drawl loomed over the table. His armor seemed darker today, polished until the ridges gleamed like obsidian knives. He did not wait for ceremony. You have polluted this duel long enough, the High Warlord thundered. Every word you speak bends law into nonsense. The chamber should end this charade now and strip your people standing. The murmur of approval came strongest from Dominion allies. Others remained silent, wary of committing too soon. Elias stood opposite, unflinching. You call it pollution. I call it interpretation. Without interpretation, law is only dead stone. Carvek's ridges flared, his teeth bared. Interpretation is invention. You create what does not exist. Elias let a faint smile cross his face. Perhaps, but invention is what made your ships fly, your weapons burn, your archives endure. Without invention, none of us would be here. A ripple of reaction swept the chamber. Some nodded reluctantly. Others hissed. Carvek struck the table with his claw, igniting the glyphs. He launched his first strike with the Dominion Charter itself. The glyphs coiled upward, displaying clauses that bound generations of conquered peoples. Each word was rigid, etched into the fabric of interstellar law. This, Carvek declared, is permanence. Dominion law is unbreakable because it is absolute. To challenge it is to defy what holds this galaxy together. The chamber responded with a low rumble of assent. Elias could feel the ground slipping beneath him. He drew a slow breath. Unbreakable? He asked softly. Then why has it been amended 36 times in the last century? Carvek froze. Elias pressed forward. I studied your charter. Each amendment carved after rebellion, after defeat, after loss. If it were unbreakable, it would not need change. Your own history proves that permanence is a lie. The glyphs shimmered, destabilized by the contradiction. Murmurs surged. Some delegates looked openly at Carvek now, measuring his reaction. Carvek's voice dropped to a growl. You overreach, human. The charter stands. You insult centuries of blood and sacrifice. I honor it, Elias replied evenly. But I honor it by telling the truth. It survived because it bent. It adapted, just as humanity does. The duel pressed on, fiercer than before. Carvek abandoned pretense of calm. He hurled precedent after precedent like weapons, his words edged with fury. Elias met him with steady counters, twisting contradictions into daylight. Each exchange drew the chamber tighter, the air thick with tension. Midway, Carvek unleashed his trap. He cited a ruling from the Soric Conclave, an unbreakable clause that forbade the creation of new precedent during a duel. The glyphs encircled Elias, glowing red, warning a violation. You have built your case on invention, Carvek said, his voice triumphant. By the Conclave's law, you stand in violation. You should be disqualified. Humanity's claim ends here. The chamber gasped. Even Vela shifted in her seat, her hand tightening into a fist. Elias was silent for a long moment, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The trap was perfect. If he admitted invention, he was guilty. If he denied it, his entire case collapsed. Finally, he raised his head. His voice was calm, but it carried like steel. I accept the Conclave clause. But you misread my intent. I did not invent precedent. I revealed it. The chamber stilled. Elias leaned forward, his eyes locked on Carvek's. Humanity's compacts are not inventions. They are laws written in smaller places, on shorter scales, yes, but laws nonetheless. They already exist. I did not create them. I invoked them. The glyphs hesitated, the system processing his distinction. Some delegates began nodding slowly. Carvek snarled. Semantics? No, Elias said. Law itself is semantics. Words given force. You demanded we argue by the book. The book includes every law that breathes meaning. That includes ours. The glyphs pulsed, recognizing validity. The chamber erupted in voices, some shouting support, others fury. The balance had shifted again. As the uproar died, Carvek struck his final blow of the day. He conjured an ancient Dominion decree, one written in blood and stone. The glyphs rose like a wall, depicting the fate of a species erased from history for failing to meet Dominion standards. This, Carvek said, voice low but deadly, is the cost of weakness. It is the precedent for your people. If humanity fails here, it deserves the same fate. Forgotten. The silence that followed was suffocating. Delegates leaned back, eyes fixed on Elias, waiting for his answer. He felt the weight of it, the threat not only to his case but to humanity itself. He could almost hear Vela's breath catch behind him. He spoke quietly, but each word cut through the chamber. You threaten us with erasure. Yet even erasure is a form of recognition. To destroy, you must first admit we exist. Humanity is already written into this book, Karvek, whether you like it or not. The glyph shifted, embedding his words into the lattice. The chamber stirred with unease, then fascination. Some delegates clapped their hands together. Others hissed, but all were listening. Karvek's ridges flared wide. His voice was a growl. You gamble too far. Tomorrow you will break. Elias met his gaze, unyielding. Tomorrow we finish what we started. The session ended in uproar. Delegates spilled from the chamber, their voices echoing through the corridors. Some argued furiously. Others whispered in wonder. The duel had become more than a contest. It had become a spectacle. In the quiet that followed, Elias walked back with Vela at his side. She was tense, her jaw clenched. You're pushing them too hard, she muttered. One wrong word, and they'll throw you out. Maybe, Elias admitted, but playing safe won't win. The Threx want us bound. If we don't gamble, we lose anyway. She studied him as they entered the human quarters. You already know what you'll do tomorrow, don't you? He sank into his chair, exhaustion pressing into his bones. Yet his eyes burned with a quiet fire. Yes, he said softly. Tomorrow we stop arguing their law. We prove that ours can stand beside it. The chamber was already full when Elias entered. The air carried a current of unease, every delegate sensing that the duel had reached its breaking point. No more arguments could be deferred, no more time bought. Today would decide if humanity had a seat among the stars or a grave in silence. Karvek Drawl stood waiting, his armor gleaming with fresh polish, the ridges of his crest sharpened until they looked like blades. He radiated certainty, as though the outcome had already been sealed. Human, the High Warlord said, his voice low and resonant. Today your tongue breaks, or your people do. There will be no other ending. Elias's footsteps echoed as he crossed his place at the table. He carried no notes, no data pads, only the weight of his decision. Then let's finish, Elias answered. The duel began with ferocity. Karvek struck first, layering precedent upon precedent, filling the chamber with glyphs that circled like chains. He cited the Dominion's power to grant standing only through conquest. He invoked rulings that demanded oaths of fealty. His words carved a cage around humanity, one bar after another. When he finished, the chamber was heavy with silence. The glyphs hung in the air like judgment itself. Karvek's mouth curled in triumph. Speak, human. Show us how your clever games escaped this. Elias rose slowly. He let the silence stretch. He wanted them listening, not dismissing. You speak of conquest as a foundation, Elias said, his tone even. That standing comes only by force. Yet here we are, not in war but in words. You yourself have bound this decision to law, not to fleets. Why? The question slipped through the chamber like a crack of light. Delegates shifted in their seats. Karvek's eyes narrowed. Because law preserves what conquest wins. Exactly, Elias replied. But law is not the weapon. Law is the memory of victory. And memory, High Warlord, is interpretation. If law were only conquest, none of you would sit here. You would still be killing one another in silence. The glyphs around him flickered. Delegates leaned forward. Elias pressed on. You say humanity must kneel or be erased. But kneeling is not the only form of recognition. Our presence here, our very need be judged, proves we have already earned notice. You cannot erase what you must first acknowledge. Murmurs rippled. Even those who distrusted humans felt the truth of it. Karvek slammed his claw against the table. Words. You twist them until nothing holds. The law is clarity, not fog. Elias met his glare. Then let's be clear. You have shown your book. I will show mine. He raised his hand. The glyph shifted, obeying his command. At first only a trickle appeared. Fragmented records pulled from humanity's archives. Then more followed. Treaties signed in smoke-filled rooms, compacts forged in desperation, declarations written by hands that shook with fear or hope. The chamber filled with human law, imperfect, contradictory, yet undeniable. These, Elias said, his voice steady, are the precedents of my people. They are not written in your archives, but they are law nonetheless. Agreements that bound kings, charters that ended wars, constitutions that outlived the men who wrote them. You asked us to argue by the book. This is our book. The chamber was transfixed. For the first time, alien delegates saw the weight of human history not as scattered fragments, but as a body of law, a lattice of meaning built across centuries. Carveck's ridges flared in outrage. This is not recognized. It has no standing in Dominion Code. Elias nodded. True, but neither did your charter once. Before conquest, before Dominion, it was only the law of the Threx. It became recognized because you forced others to accept it. That is your precedent. And by that precedent, humanity's laws already qualify. The glyphs trembled. The system weighed as logic, unable to dismiss it outright. Delegates whispered, their voices carrying a tone of unease and possibility. You corner yourself, Carveck spat. If your laws are binding, then so are your failures. Shall we summon every atrocity, every broken oath of your kind? Summon them, Elias replied without hesitation. Our failures are part of the record. We do not erase them. We learn from them. That is why our law endures. Not because it is perfect, but because it admits its own imperfection. Can your charter say the same? The chamber went utterly silent. The challenge hung like a blade in the air. Carveck's fury boiled over. He rose to his full height, towering above the table, and roared. Enough! This duel is over. The human has broken the rules by introducing unrecognized law. By the authority of the High Warlord, I declare... Stop, came a voice from the dais. It was Counselor Yara, one of the oldest voices in the chamber, her eyes like polished glass. She leaned forward, studying Elias with careful intensity. The rules allow any precedent if it can be shown to bind a people. The human has shown this. His book is valid. Gasp swept the chamber. Carveck wheeled toward her, his crest bristling. You betray the Dominion. I preserve it, Yara said coolly. Law survives because it adapts. You forget this truth, Warlord. The human remembers it. Elias felt the moment shift. The duel was no longer his to win. It was the chamber's to decide. But he had one more strike to deliver. He stepped forward, his voice carrying with quiet force. You asked us to prove we belong. We have done so not with ships or weapons, but with words, the very tools you claim to honor. If humanity is denied now, it will not be because we fail the law. It will be because the Dominion fears the mirror we hold before it. The glyphs crystallized as words into the lattice. The chamber erupted, not with chaos, but with debate, the kind that hummed with decision. Minutes stretched into hours. Finally, the lattice dimmed, signaling judgment. The verdict appeared, carved in light across the chamber's core. Humanity is granted provisional standing among the lawful peoples of the galaxy. Carveck's roar of rage shook the chamber. This is corruption. Weakness. Elias faced him, unflinching. No, this is recognition. By your own rules. By the book. For a long moment, they stood locked in silence, predator and prey reversed. Then Carveck turned away, his armor creaking with restrained violence. He had lost not to war, but to law. Later, in the quiet of the human quarters, Vela found Elias sitting alone, his hands trembling faintly now that the fire had passed. You did it, she said softly. He exhaled long and heavy. No, we did it. Humanity didn't win because of me. We won because we carried our book into theirs. She sat across from him, studying his weary face. And what happens now? Elias managed a tired smile. Now we learn to write the next chapter.